It's Friday, the 20th of August 2021. Welcome to Fear and Greed, the business podcast that sets you up for a successful day. I'm Sean Aylmer. The unemployment rate falls to a 12-year low, but it's the calm before the storm, with hundreds of thousands of jobs expected to go by the end of September. That's our main story. Also coming up in today's podcast, Australia achieves a one-jab vaccination rate of 50% as COVID cases soar. Newcrest, Star Entertainment and Origin Energy provide mixed profit reports, and how Snoop Dogg helped Treasury Wines make a profit. Then stay listening for my chat about the mutual banking sector. But first, here's a brief look at markets. There were some pretty big moves across global markets over the past 24 hours. Wall Street was mixed overnight, with technology stocks outperforming energy, industrial and financial shares. In early afternoon trading, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was off 0.4%, the S&P 500 was 0.1% lower, and the Nasdaq was up 0.3%. There were big sell-offs in European markets, with both London's FTSE and the Stoxx Europe 600 closing down 1.5%. The French bourse was down nearly 2.5% after 112 people died of coronavirus, the most in almost 3 months in that country. Fears about COVID-19 stalling the recovery and comments from the Federal Reserve Board minutes that it might reduce bond purchases this year underpinned the drops. Some Asian bourses yesterday hit their lowest level this year, led by Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index, which fell more than 1%. COVID, new regulations from Beijing, and concerns about a global slowdown triggered the drops. The S&P ASX 200 closed down 0.5% yesterday, finishing at 7,465 points. The materials companies and energy stocks were the worst performers. All the big miners were hit as iron ore prices fell below $160 a tonne. BHP, Rio and Fortescue Metals all ended down around 6% yesterday. At the other end of the spectrum, healthcare stocks surged, as did consumer discretionary companies, after some strong full-year earnings announcements over the past fortnight. CSL jumped more than 3% after Wednesday's profit result. James Hardie was up 2%, while Xero rose 1.8%. The big four banks were generally lower. Woodside Petroleum tumbled 3.4%, while QBE Insurance was off more than 2%. Oil prices fell sharply overnight. In fact, the price of many commodities fell over the past 24 hours on the back of concerns about the global recovery. A barrel of Brent crude is fetching $66.5. Even gold, which is normally a safe haven asset, was lower. And the Aussie dollar fell sharply, or more correctly, the US dollar appreciated against many major currencies. The Aussie is currently worth 71.4 US cents. In what's best described as the calm before the storm, the unemployment rate fell to a 12-year low last month of 4.6%, thanks to fewer people looking for work. With lockdowns in New South Wales, Victoria and the ACT now in place, the July rate is likely to be the lowest for some time, as the number of unemployed is set to soar. The total number of employed people rose 2,200 last month, and the number of employed was close to 9% higher than the low of May last year. The Bureau of Statistics survey was taken in the middle of July, before Victoria closed down. There are about 64,000 fewer people in New South Wales looking for a job, according to the report, meaning they're not counted in the unemployment rate. The participation rate nationally fell to 66%, but it dropped more sharply in New South Wales due to the lockdowns. AMP Capital Chief Economist Shane Oliver said adjusting for the drop in participation and the number of people working 0 hours, the real unemployment rate was closer to 5.5%. He expects New South Wales and Victoria to lose about 300,000 jobs this month and next. Even Federal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg wasn't putting much faith in the figures. He said hitting a 12-year low in unemployment should be a cause for celebration, but it wasn't. Mr. Frydenberg said the government expected the economy to contract by about 2% during the current quarter, a figure that most market economists say is too optimistic. The Treasurer wouldn't speculate on whether the economy was heading for a double-dip recession, whereby it records 2 quarters of negative growth, having already done so last year. This week, we've seen weak wages growth and signs that the employment market has come to a shuddering halt. Any thought of interest rates rising any time in the next couple of years is definitely off the agenda. In a moment, the rest of the news you need to know this morning. In overseas news, Toyota said it will cut global production next month by 40%, as it struggles to find semiconductor chips for its vehicles. It had intended to manufacture 900,000 cars next month, but now it expects to make just 500,000. Toyota's share price fell nearly 5% yesterday. Beijing has warned the tech sector about new rules around the rights of drivers who work for online companies, and the government wants to increase oversight of the live streaming industry. The ongoing crackdown on the technology sector sent the share prices of tech stocks tumbling yesterday, and Alibaba Group hit a record low. A study in the United Kingdom has found that COVID-19 vaccines are less effective against the Delta variant, with the Pfizer vaccine losing effectiveness in the first 90 days after full vaccination. However, the jab, along with the AstraZeneca inoculation, still staved off a majority of coronavirus infections. And the competition watchdog in the US has filed an antitrust complaint against Facebook, claiming the technology giant maintains monopoly power and uses a buy or bury strategy to neutralize competitors. The US Federal Trade Commission has previously, unsuccessfully, sought to force Facebook to unwind its acquisitions of Instagram and WhatsApp. Locally, National Cabinet has agreed to open up the vaccine rollout to people aged 16 to 39 years from the end of the month. That's an additional 8.6 million people able to access the Pfizer vaccine, though bookings aren't open yet. More than half of all eligible Australians have now received at least one jab of a COVID vaccine. A milestone the Prime Minister lauded yesterday, though the opposition Labor Party, among others, pointed out that globally Australia has done poorly. There are now more than 300,000 doses being administered each day. About 55% of eligible residents in New South Wales have now received a jab, only behind the ACT, which has a 56% one-jab rate. Businesses are pushing to increase the vaccination rate. Following Qantas's decision to introduce a no-jab, no-work policy, Rio Tinto yesterday said it was partnering with the West Australia government to vaccinate miners on site, though it stopped short of mandating jabs. The deal should boost the vaccination rates of Indigenous Australians. Westpac has commenced using rapid antigen tests of customer-facing staff in Sydney's COVID hotspots. The tests give results in 15 minutes. If the pilot program works, it will be expanded. Meanwhile, the COVID outbreak gets worse. New South Wales yesterday reported 681 new local coronavirus cases and one more death. The outbreak has reached the far west of the state, and regional New South Wales lockdown has been extended until August 28. Premier Gladys Berejiklian said she would reveal next week what relaxed restrictions are likely for places where cases are low and the vaccine uptake is high. Media reports this morning suggest there could be easing of restrictions around bars, restaurants and gyms once a 70% vaccination rate is achieved. In Victoria, there were 57 recorded cases, the highest of the current wave. Fortunately, the vast majority were in isolation, though as we've learnt, the Delta variant needs only a few people in the community to spread widely. Victorians spent their 200th day in lockdown yesterday since the outbreak of COVID back in February last year. There were 16 new cases in the ACT, and the territory remains in lockdown. The evacuation of Australians from Afghanistan continues, with 76 people leaving Kabul on Wednesday night. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said the situation remains extremely dangerous and complex, and a further 40 defence personnel have been deployed to the city. Further Mercy flights will depend on whether Australian aircraft can get landing slots at the airport. The country's biggest gold miner, Newcrest Mining, said profit was up last financial year and shareholders will receive a bigger dividend. Newcrest mined 2.1 million ounces of gold and 143,000 tonnes of copper during the year, both record levels, and prices for the commodities were high. Its core profit was $1.2 billion. Newcrest also pledged to deliver net zero emissions by 2050. Its share price rose 1.2% yesterday. Yesterday morning, I talked about what people did during lockdowns. They ate pizza and bought lottery tickets, or at least that's what the profit results of Domino's and Tabcorp suggest. What they didn't do is go to casinos. Star Entertainment said earnings fell 5% last financial year on the back of shutdowns and restrictions. Even when it was operating, the international border closures hurt the business. But, as a very strong performance of Star's Gold Coast Casino shows, people head back to the gaming tables once everything reopens. Investors liked the story and Star's share price jumped more than 7% yesterday. I always wince when I look at the big energy companies' half-year earnings, and Origin Energy didn't disappoint yesterday, reporting a $2.3 billion loss for the last financial year. Lower commodity prices and COVID-19 took a very heavy toll on the company, as did big write-offs on the value of its assets. On an underlying basis, which excludes the write-offs, profit fell from $1 billion a year ago to $318 million. Chief Executive Frank Calabria said headwinds were continuing this financial year and its share price fell more than 4%. Treasury Wine Estates had some good news. Notwithstanding the punitive tariffs put on its exports to China, the winemaker reported slightly higher revenue last year and an improved profit. It also upped its dividend. Boss Tim Ford said the current lockdowns made it too difficult to provide a forecast for the 2022 financial year. Its share price fell 1.3%. As an aside, several years ago, Treasury did a deal with Snoop Dogg to be brand ambassador for 19 Crimes, the wine brand Treasury sells into the US. It's paying off. Sales of 19 Crimes reached 5 million cases last financial year, or about 16% of the group's total. Mining and Metals Group South 32, which was once part of BHP, reported a loss for the second year in a row, despite achieving record production at several of its operations. Chief Executive Graham Kerr said the business was remaking itself and expected to record higher production volumes at its base metal operations this financial year. Its share price dropped 0.7%. And there are far too many results around at the moment to go through them all. Some of the highlights include ASX Limited, that's the company which is home to the share market, outlining a drop in net profit and its dividend last financial year. Gourmet food producer Maggie Beer is benefiting from lockdowns and people buying its products, but the Reject Shop, which doesn't have a strong online presence, reported that times are tough. Finally, Buy Now Pay Later Group Hum turned a profit. It's one of the few operators in that sector making money. Up next is our daily interview, and my guest today is David Marshall, the CEO of Defence Bank. Defence Bank is one of many credit unions, mutuals and building societies that have become a bank over the last 10 or 15 years. And since making the change, Defence Bank's had incredible growth. David and I chat about why the sector has quietly undergone such a significant change and what it means for consumers. That's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. It's Friday, the 20th of August 2021. I'm Sean Aylmer, and that was Fear and Greed. Enjoy your day.